What would you do if your dog stopped in the middle of a dead jungle trail, stared at the mud for 3 silent seconds, and found the kind of footprints no human eye could even recognize? Footprints that led not toward safety, but straight into the most dangerous rescue of your life. The retired soldier did not answer that question with words. He answered it the only way men like him ever did, when the world suddenly shifted beneath their boots. He tightened his grip on the worn rifle hanging low against his side, slowed his breathing until the jungle itself seemed to lean closer, and watched the German shepherd lower his nose toward the ground with a focus so sharp it looked almost supernatural. The forest around them was hot, wet, and alive in all the wrong ways, a deep green world of twisted roots, hanging vines, rotting leaves, black mud, and old silence broken only by insects, distant water, and the occasional crack of something unseen moving through the understory. A storm had passed over the jungle 2 hours earlier, but the air still carried that damp electric heaviness that came after hard rain, as if the whole wilderness had inhaled and forgotten how to breathe back out.
Thank you.
The trail ahead had nearly vanished under washouts, leaf fall, and the restless movement of floodwater, yet the dog stood there, as if he could see a path burned into the earth itself. If you believe in stories where loyalty becomes the only light inside a dark place, then this journey on Shepherd Soldier Stories is for you. The soldier said nothing as the dog took one careful step forward, then another, then angled off the ruined trail and into a wall of dripping vegetation where no sane person would have willingly gone without a map, a team, and a very good reason. He followed anyway, because the dog had never once been wrong when it mattered. The man had not come into that jungle looking for glory, redemption, or even peace. Men in towns and cities like to imagine retired soldiers carried some permanent hunger for heroism, as if once a man had worn a uniform, he spent the rest of his life wandering around waiting for one more mission to save his soul. The truth was uglier. He had come because a rescue request had reached him through an old contact who knew 2 things about him that the rest of the world didn't. First, that he still answered when the problem was bad enough. And second, that he trusted his German shepherd more than he trusted almost anyone breathing. The missing person had vanished 30 hours earlier near a decommissioned survey route deep inside a restricted jungle sector that official maps still labeled unstable after flooding and landslides. Search teams had gone in. Search teams had come back out. Drones had lost signal under the canopy. Locals had started whispering the usual things people whispered when fear found an old place and made a home there. Bad ground, swallowed trails, voices in the dark, men who entered one valley and somehow came out miles away in another with no memory of how they crossed. He did not believe in haunted forests. He believed in terrain, concealment, desperation, and the ugly intelligence of people who knew how to use all 3. That belief had kept him alive in countries whose names still woke him some nights, drenched in sweat, with his hand reaching for a rifle that had not hung by his bed in years. He was somewhere in his early 40s now, though exhaustion, solitude, and old injuries had made age a less useful measure of him than his eyes did. Those eyes had gone hard a long time ago, not cold exactly, but sharpened by grief the way storm waters sharpen rock over time. His face carried the kind of weathered lines that did not come from sunlight alone. His body was still strong, still disciplined, still carrying the memory of long marches, bad nights, and violent choices made in seconds. But the life inside the body had changed after service the way forests changed after fire. Not all at once, not in one dramatic collapse, but in quiet stages of absence. He had gone home carrying more than scars. He had carried names, voices, unfinished guilt, and the deep private shame of a man who had survived when stronger, kinder, better men had not. Marriage did not survive that weight. Distance did. Silence did. One day, the only creature left in his home that seemed to understand the language of his breathing was the dog now moving ahead of him through dripping green darkness. The German Shepherd had started as a working partner years earlier and ended as something closer to the last witness of the man he used to be. The dog knew when his hands trembled before dawn, knew which sound still snapped his head toward exits, knew how to place his body against his leg when memory got too loud. And now, in a jungle where even experienced trackers had lost the line, the animal had found something no human had seen. At first the soldier saw nothing at all. Just mud, broken leaves, water-sunk debris, the kind of ruined ground that could make any trail look erased. But the dog kept moving in short, precise bursts, nose working low, then lifting, then dropping again, following some delicate thread through the chaos. The soldier crouched once and studied the soil where the German Shepherd had paused. The print was barely there. Not a full impression, not a clean heel mark, not anything a rush searcher would ever call evidence. It was only the slightest sink in a patch of softened earth beside a root, too narrow to be obvious, too light to be visible unless you were searching for the exact way disturbed mud failed to settle like the ground around it. Someone small, barely weighting one side, maybe limping, maybe being pulled. The soldier looked up at the dog and understood the problem immediately. The missing person had not simply walked through here. They had been trying not to leave a track, which meant one of two things. They knew someone was hunting them, or the person leading them did. The jungle thickened the deeper they went. Sunlight no longer reached the floor in any useful shape. It came down in weak broken shafts that struck broad leaves, dead trunks, and hanging mist but never stayed anywhere long enough to feel like comfort. The earth beneath them changed every 10 or 15 yards, as if the forest itself refused consistency. First black mud, then root tangles, then slick stone, then a low stretch of floodwater carrying floating debris, and the sweet stink of rot. Mosquitoes rose in whiting clouds. Pale fungus clung to dead bark. Somewhere high above, monkeys screamed once, and then went silent, with the abruptness of animals sensing something larger than themselves nearby. The soldier moved with old habits doing half the work for him. He checked broken stems, sap stains, drag marks on low branches, signs of cut vegetation, signs of hurried passage, signs of men who knew enough to hide, but not enough to hide cleanly. Twice he found boot impressions too heavy to belong to the missing person. Once he found a cigarette, but tucked under a fern where the rain had not yet reached it. Not old. Another time he found a strip of synthetic cloth snagged on a thorn, not torn by accident, but cut with a blade. Somebody had passed through here with intent. Somebody armed, disciplined enough to conceal, sloppy enough to bleed hints behind. He touched the damp cloth, then glanced ahead where the dog had stopped again and gone completely still. The German Shepherd's stillness was never empty. It meant calculation. The dog stood with one paw slightly lifted, head angled toward a stand of cane growing beside a narrow runoff channel. His ears were forward, but his body had lowered just enough to say uncertainty had hardened into warning. The soldier eased up beside him and listened. Water dripping. Far thunder. Insects. Then, somewhere inside the cane, very faint and very wrong, the sound of a metal object gently touching another metal object. Not wind. Not natural movement. Human carelessness or human fear. He raised the rifle and stepped sideways, circling for angle while the dog moved the opposite way without command, black antennae for ghosting between leaves like another kind of shadow. The soldier pushed the rifle muzzle through the cane and saw the body half a second before the person behind it saw him. A man lay face down in the runoff channel with one arm twisted under him and a pack half torn from his shoulders. Alive, but only just. Jungle field clothes. Mud from shoulder to boot. Blood washed pale by rain where something had opened the back of his scalp. The sound had come from his metal canteen bumping weakly against a clipped tool while he tried and failed to crawl. When the man rolled enough to show his face, the soldier saw he was no local. Civilian contractor maybe. Surveyor. Early 30s. Shocky eyes. Lips gray with dehydration and fear. "Don't," the soldier said, because the man had made the universal mistake of reaching for the knife at his belt before identifying who stood over him. "If you pull that, I'm going to break your arm and then we both lose time." The man froze. His gaze shifted from the rifle to the dog coming silently out of the brush at his flank, then back to the soldier. "You came alone?" "Didn't say that." The answer seemed to unsettle him more than comfort him. He swallowed hard. "There were 3 of us left this morning." The soldier knelt fast, checked the head wound, then the pupils, then the pulse at the neck. Fast and thin. "Where are the other 2? The man looked toward the deeper jungle, and for a second the expression on his face stopped being adult fear and turned into something much more primal. "1 ran. 1 got taken." The soldier's jaw hardened. "Taken by who?" The answer came too quickly. "I don't know." He believed the man did not know names. He did not believe the man knew nothing. The dog nosed the injured man's sleeve, then shifted away and began sniffing the ground around the channel edge instead of the body itself. That was what made the soldier look up sharply. The German shepherd had locked onto a scent line leading the runoff, not toward the open jungle but upslope toward darker terrain where the ground climbed into a ridge of massive roots and black volcanic stone half wrapped in vines. Whatever had happened here, it had moved on. And the dog was already telling him the live trail mattered more than the man in the ditch. "Can you stand?" the soldier asked. The surveyor gave a broken laugh that died almost at once. "If I had a choice, I'd say no. You don't." He slung the man's arm over his shoulder, hauled him upright, and felt dead weight try to pull him sideways immediately. "You slow me down, I leave you tied to a tree with a flare. Understand?" The surveyor looked at him, trying to decide if it was a threat or policy. Then he saw the dog waiting above them on the slope, muscles tight and eyes fixed deeper into the jungle, and seemed to understand there was no room left for offense. "Yeah." They climbed. Badly. The surveyor's legs shook. Once he nearly went down and had to be jerked upright by the front of his jacket. The soldier did not waste energy on sympathy. He conserved it for attention. The ridge above was wrong in a way experienced men learned to recognize before they understood it. Too quiet. Too few bird calls. Too little random animal movement. The kind of silence that meant human presence had altered the pattern of the place. He found boot scuffs on stone where no natural trail should have existed, then a section of vine recently cut and draped back to appear untouched. Then, near the base of a split boulder, the thing that changed the mission from dangerous to personal. A scrap of old emergency marker tape, faded by years, tied low around a root in a knot he knew by feel more than sight. His own unit had used that knot in jungle movement corridors because it could be fast tied in darkness by touch alone. No local tracker would know it. No contractor would choose it. He stared at the strip while rainwater slid off his brow and down his nose. The jungle seemed to lean closer around him. The surveyor saw his face change. "What is it?" The soldier untied the tape slowly and folded it into his palm. "Nothing good." But in truth, it was worse than that. It was recognition. Years earlier, in another operation officially closed and buried under layers of sealed reports and polite silence, his team had entered the same broad region under different coordinates for a retrieval mission no one had ever explained fully. There had been a crash. Cargo. Bad weather. Lost comms. Men dead in ways paperwork could flatten but never honor. He had walked out of that jungle with fewer bodies than names and a permanent understanding that someone above his pay grade had lied about what mattered most. He had spent years refusing to chase the memory because memory already took too much. And now his dog had found a track no human team could follow, leading him not just toward a missing person, but toward a path his own past had once walked and failed to finish. The ridge ended at a shallow basin hidden under giant ferns and hanging vines. In the center stood what had once been some kind of monitoring outpost or survey relay, now reduced to rusted poles, collapsed panels, and half-buried equipment choked by moss. It should have looked abandoned. Instead, it looked recently disturbed. One panel had been dragged aside. A generator casing sat open. Plastic sheeting hidden under leaf-litter-covered stacked supply crates. The soldier dropped the wounded surveyor behind a stone slab and signaled the dog low. The German shepherd vanished instantly into a screen of cane at the basin edge. Good dog. Good, impossible dog. The soldier studied the sight through the rain. No obvious bodies. No obvious guards. But the air held diesel, metal, and with smoke fresh enough to matter. Somewhere nearby, men were living inside dead infrastructure because dead places stayed off official maps. He was still deciding whether to pull back, watch, and wait for movement when he heard it. A child crying. Not loud. Not near. But unmistakable. The sound lasted maybe 2 seconds and then cut off so abruptly it was worse than a scream. The soldier's eyes found the dog in the cane at the same instant. The dog's head snapped toward the basin's far side, where dense growth covered a narrow gully. The surveyor behind the stone went rigid. "That's her," he whispered. "That's the one they took." The soldier turned. "A child?" The surveyor looked sick. "She wasn't part of our team. We found her first. Hiding. Barefoot. Wouldn't talk. Then they came out of nowhere and grabbed her before we could get her out." The words landed with a deep, ugly force. So the mission was already worse than the file had admitted. It was no longer just a missing adult in bad terrain. Somewhere ahead, in the darkest part of that hidden basin, there was a child who had left almost no track a human could see, and the German shepherd had followed the only line that still led to her. The soldier looked toward the gully, then back at the surveyor, then at the dog waiting for the next command like loyalty had taken physical form. He felt the old dead part of himself stirring under the weight of unfinished memory, but something stronger rose over it now. Simpler. Cleaner. A rescue. Not an old lie. Not sealed history. A living child in the hands of men who knew how to disappear in jungle terrain. The dog moved first. He took one silent step down toward the gully, then looked back. And the soldier followed him into the most dangerous rescue of his life. Have you ever felt the exact moment when a mission stops being something you accepted and becomes something that owns you? The jungle gave him that feeling as soon as he dropped into the gully behind the German shepherd, because the air changed there in a way no weather report, satellite image, or official briefing could ever explain. Above the basin, the forest had smelled of rain, wet bark, and leaf rot. Down here, beneath the curtain of giant ferns and hanging vines, it smelled of trapped heat, diesel fumes, old blood, and the stale breath of men who had been hiding in the same dead place for too long. The light changed too. What little daylight survived the thick canopy overhead came down in thin green slices that never fully reached the ground, leaving the ravine in a permanent bruised half-dark broken only by reflections on wet stone and slow drips of water gathering on leaves. Every surface looked slick, quiet, and treacherous. Every sound felt too close. His boots sank into black mud at the bottom of the gully, and cold water seeped over the tops without him even noticing because all his attention had narrowed to the dog moving ahead and the faint traces the animal was reading with unnerving certainty. The German shepherd did not rush. He never mistook urgency for recklessness. He moved with his body low, black ant and coat brushed dark with mud, shoulders rolling under the worn tactical harness, as he traced an invisible path along the ravine wall. Twice he stopped, sniffed, recalculated, then shifted farther right where exposed roots and slick stone offered quieter footing. The soldier followed exactly in that line, knowing from long practice that when the dog made choices like that, the terrain itself was talking through him. Behind them, the wounded surveyor stayed hidden where he had been dropped behind the stone slab above the basin, armed with a pistol and enough fear to keep him from making stupid noise. The soldier had not wanted to leave him, but a rescue was made of priorities, and priorities were sometimes ugly. A half-functional adult who could hold cover for 10 minutes mattered less than a child somewhere deeper in this hidden jungle pocket under the control of people who knew how to vanish from search teams. He had told the men to stay low, fire only if found, and if things went wrong, burn the emergency flare in his pack and run downhill toward the river no matter what happened to anybody else. The surveyor had agreed with the kind of hollow-eyed obedience that came after too much shock and not enough rest. Then the soldier had left him behind because the crying child mattered more. The gully narrowed after 20 yards and turned into a kind of natural corridor shaped by runoff and old erosion, its walls thick with roots, volcanic rock, and the remains of structures that looked at first like part of the hillside until the eye recognized human geometry inside the moss and vines. A section of concrete jutted out from one wall. A rusted cable bracket hung from stone where no cable should have been. Under a blanket of creepers, he saw the collapsed corner of a reinforced panel with bolts too heavy for civilian survey equipment. This was not just a dead relay site anymore. It was older than that. Something layered. Something built, abandoned, and later repurposed by men smart enough to use forgotten infrastructure instead of creating new signs in a watched world. That realization tightened something in his chest, because the jungle had started giving him those pieces years earlier, and he had spent years refusing to complete the picture. He remembered now, not everything, but enough. There had been whispers during the original mission, not between official channels, between exhausted men moving through bad terrain who had started noticing that their map did not match the hidden concrete they kept finding under the roots, or the coded markings under the mud, or the fact that the retrieval package they were sent after seemed to matter more to command than their own extraction timeline did. He had buried those suspicions because burying them was easier than admitting the men above him had fed his team into a place whose real purpose they were never meant to understand. And yet here he was again, moving through the same poison puzzle, only now it was his dog reading the pieces first. The German shepherd stopped so abruptly that the soldier nearly stepped into him. That alone told him the next decision mattered. He crouched low beside the dog and followed his line of sight to the mud ahead. At first it looked like nothing but runoff grooves and leaf litter. Then he saw what the dog had found. Bare footprints. Very small. Partial impressions only, the kind the rain almost erased, and the eye would skip right over unless it knew that natural runoff did not split around toes that way. One foot had landed lightly. The other had dragged slightly on the outer edge. Frightened movement. Exhaustion. Possibly injured. The child had been here. Not carried the whole time. Brought or dragged through, but still alive enough at some point to move under her own power. The dog touched his nose once to the clearest print and then looked up, not for permission, but to confirm the man understood the importance of what lay ahead. He did. The child was real. The trail was real. And whatever had hidden her through all the official search failures knew this jungle better than the people looking for her. He slid a hand once against the dog's neck in silent praise, then listened. Voices. Very faint. Not above them in the basin. Deeper ahead and lower than the ravine should have gone. Male voices, half swallowed by rock and foliage, moving in clipped fragments the way professionals spoke when they thought distance protected them. He could not make out words yet, only tone. Calm. Controlled. No panic. No sense that they expected immediate pressure. Good. Surprise still belonged to him. He eased forward inch by inch until the ravine opened into a narrow overlook partially hidden by bamboo and hanging root clusters. Below lay the heart of the place. What had once been a service trench or access cut had been transformed into a hidden camp built around the bones of some older underground facility. Concrete spillways, broken generator housings, and half-buried steel doors protruded from the earth under years of jungle growth. Sheets of camouflage tarp had been stretched between structural remains to create dry working areas. Black crates sat stacked under netting. Fuel cans were half hidden behind sandbags and moss-covered barricade walls. A portable generator hummed under a rain hood, feeding dim work lights that cast weak amber circles through the wet gloom. It looked temporary until you noticed how intelligently everything had been placed, where sightlines crossed, where the drainage was controlled, where the access lane vanished under cut vegetation, where the watch posts overlooked both the basin and the ravine approach. Men had been living here long enough to become careful. Not a raiding party. Not a passing criminal camp. A route node. A holding place. A machine hidden inside the jungle. And in the center of that machine, tied to a low pipe rail beneath one of the tarps, sat the child. She could not have been older than 8. Small. Mud-covered. Barefoot. Knees pulled tight against herself. Her clothes were torn and too light for the cold, wet jungle, and one side of her face was streaked with dirt where tears had dried and been replaced by new ones. A strip of cloth had been tied over her mouth at some point and now hung loose around her neck, likely because whoever guarded her had decided exhaustion did their work for them. One ankle was bound with what looked like plastic zip cord looped around the rail support, not enough to stop movement entirely, but enough to prevent a run. She was staring at the ground when he first saw her, eyes empty in the way frightened children sometimes looked after terror had burned through all the louder reactions and left only waiting behind. Then the German shepherd shifted beside him, only the smallest movement, just enough for his harness ring to touch a root with a soft metallic click. The child's head lifted instantly. Not toward the sound as if startled. Toward it as if some deeper instinct in her still believed help might come in exactly that shape. Her eyes found the dog through the hanging vines, and for one impossible second something alive returned to her face. The soldier felt the shift inside himself immediately, and hated how powerful it was. Men like him learned to lock away emotional reactions during work, because emotions made hands sloppy and choices romantic. But some sights broke through anyway. A child bound under a jungle tarp in a hidden camp built by armed men. His dog being the first living thing she looked at with hope. It struck him with the clean force of a command. Rescue her. Whatever else this place was. Whatever old ghosts it held. Whatever truth about the sealed mission might still be buried beneath these roots and concrete scars. Rescue her first. He counted 4 visible armed men in under 10 seconds. One smoking near the fuel cans. One seated by the generator with a radio handset. One moving between crates and a covered table, inventorying or checking something in a notebook. One posted higher under a slanted section of broken catwalk that served as an overwatch line toward the basin. There would be more. Hidden angles. Rotating sentries. Maybe someone underground if the steel access door under the vine still opened to usable interior space. A direct rush would be suicide, especially with the child tied in the middle of the camp. If gunfire started too soon, she died first or got dragged out through a secondary tunnel before he ever touched her. He needed distraction, confusion, and one clean path to the restraint point. He looked at the dog and knew from the pressure in the animal's body that the same assessment was already forming in a simpler, purer way. He touched 2 fingers low against the dog's harness and whispered so softly that even the leaves seemed louder. "Wait." Below, the man by the generator said something and laughed. Another replied. The words were still too indistinct to catch, but the rhythm was wrong for rescuers, wrong for guards simply holding a perimeter. Too relaxed, too practiced. The child kept her eyes on the vines where the dog crouched hidden. Good. She knew now. She knew she had not been abandoned by the world entirely. That knowledge alone might save her life if the next minute went bad. The soldier backed from the overlook and began circling the ravine edge, moving through wet stone and cane while the dog mirrored him on the inside line. He needed entry angle, not observation. Twice, he stopped to examine older concrete fragments set into the earth and realized the hidden camp had not been built from scratch at all. It had grown around an old maintenance tunnel system. Drainage grates, capped vents, a half-collapsed emergency ladder shaft swallowed by roots, pieces of infrastructure once tied to something larger underground. That matched too much of what his old mission had hinted at. Retrieval package. Crash zone nearby. Buried infrastructure. Hidden routes. The mission years ago had not stumbled into a hostile place by chance. It had brushed against a secret network already living under the jungle and died before it could understand the shape of it. If that was true, then the child's capture was not random either. Maybe she saw something. Maybe she ran from somewhere she should never have reached. Maybe the survey team had crossed one hidden line too many and dragged her story into their own disaster by accident. None of that changed the immediate fact. A child tied under a tarp. Armed men between her and freedom. And one German shepherd who had seen tracks no human could see and brought him here in time. The flank route revealed itself in fragments. A broken drainage channel ran around the camp's north edge under heavy vegetation. Water still flowed through it from higher runoff, but shallow enough to move if he stayed low. Better, the channel passed under the broken catwalk support where the Overwatch man's visibility dropped to almost nothing unless he leaned fully out. Worse, the mud there would be slick, noisy, and smell strongly of stagnant water and fuel. Better again, the dog could move through it almost silently. He studied the line, then the visible sentries, then the child. The little girl had lowered her head again, but not in surrender now. In waiting. He knew the difference. Children who had fully given up looked empty. This one still carried tension in the shoulders. Hope hurt worse than despair, but it also kept people alive long enough to be rescued. He leaned close to the dog's ear. Two-step diversion, he whispered, fingers touching the harness and patterns the dog had known for years. Not the child. Not yet. Generator sighed. Pull them left. I take center. The German shepherd looked at him once, rain dripping from his whiskers, amber eyes clear with complete attention. Then he turned back toward the drainage line. The soldier moved too, slower, circling into position through the channel while counting breaths instead of seconds. A fifth man emerged from the steel access door under the vines. The moment the soldier saw him, every muscle in his body locked. Older than the others. Lean. Controlled. The kind of face age had not softened but reduced to essentials. He carried no visible rifle, just a sidearm, and the kind of confidence that came when other people did violence for you. He stepped under the tarp, crouched beside the tied child, and lifted her chin with 2 fingers as if examining property. Then he said something low that the soldier could not hear, but that made the child pull back in quiet terror. The dog, hidden somewhere in the drainage channel with a better scent line than sight, gave the slightest, almost inaudible growl. The older man looked up. Not at the dog's exact position. Not at the soldier. Just up, out into the green dark of the ravine, with the expression of someone who had already begun to sense that the jungle around his camp was no longer his alone. And that was when the soldier understood the rescue had just become worse than dangerous. The man who came out of that underground door was not just another guard. He was somebody who already expected him to be there. What would you do if the man holding a frightened child in a hidden jungle camp looked up into the darkness and somehow made you feel recognized before he had even seen your face? The retired soldier did not move for one long second, because movement was exactly what that kind of man expected from amateurs, and nothing about the older figure beneath the tarp felt amateur. He had the stillness of someone who had spent years in dangerous ground without needing to prove it, the kind of stillness that did not come from bravery but from familiarity with control. Rain dripped off the tarp edges around him in steady silver lines, cutting the weak yellow work light into trembling bars across his face and shoulders, and even from the drainage channel the soldier could read the details that mattered. The man was lean, not large, but built with that deceptive compact strength certain operators carried after age had burned away all unnecessary bulk. No wasted motion. No loud posture. No weapon displayed because he did not need one visible to shape a room. He crouched by the child as if the camp existed around him rather than with him, one hand under her chin, one knee in the mud, speaking softly enough that the rain swallowed the words. The girl recoiled as far as the zip cord allowed, and the German shepherd's low hidden growl thickened in the reeds until the soldier touched the mud with 2 fingers and held them there, a command shaped more by trust than training. Wait. Not yet. Below, the older man finally released the child's face and straightened. Then he looked toward the generator, toward the smoking guard, toward the crate table, and whatever he said next changed the mood of the whole camp immediately. The laughter vanished. The guard by the fuel cans crushed his cigarette under heel and shouldered his rifle. The man at the notebook shut it and moved toward the tarp edge with quick-clipped efficiency. The one by the radio lowered his headset cup, listening differently now. The camp had not spotted the soldier. Not exactly. But the man from the underground door had felt the balance change in the jungle around him, and that was enough to set the machine in motion. The retired soldier eased lower into the drainage channel, black water soaking through one sleeve as he settled behind a curtain of reeds and studied the angles all over again. For armed men visible had become 5, and the 5th was clearly the one who mattered. A direct extraction of the child under those circumstances would fail unless the first 10 seconds shattered the camp's confidence completely. He needed a distraction big enough to pull eyes and guns left, a strike fast enough to take down at least one flank, and an approach line that got him to the child before the older man understood what he was facing. It was possible. Ugly, but possible. Then the hidden man did something that made the whole operation suddenly personal in a way the soldier had been hoping to avoid. He turned his head toward the ravine and spoke in a calm, carrying voice pitched just high enough to travel through the rain. "You are always going to follow the dog." The words cut through the jumble like wire pulled tight. The visible guards stiffened, not because they saw a target, but because the sentence told them one was close and important. The soldier felt the old cold weight in his chest settle lower. So that was how it was. Recognition first. Ambush second. The German shepherd shifted beside the reeds again, no longer growling now, but holding a total stillness, so complete it felt like potential energy given fur and teeth. Good dog. Better than good. The man below continued, still not raising his voice. "I wondered if you'd trust your own instincts enough to come in alone. Turns out I should have trusted the dog more than the man." One of the younger guards started to say something, but the older man lifted a hand, and the sentence died. That hand movement told the soldier even more than the words had. Authority without display. Men obeying because they knew exactly what happened if they failed. The soldier lifted the rifle just enough to settle the sight line on the man's upper chest. One shot would drop him if the angle held. But the moment he fired, one of the guards would yank the child, another would flood the drainage line with rounds, and the underground door under the vines might swallow both hostages and evidence before he could clear the gap. A single kill was not the rescue. The rescue was the child. He did not lower the rifle because he doubted himself. He lowered it because this was the part weaker men misunderstood about violence. Not all targets were worth the trigger the moment they appeared. Some had to remain alive for a few more breaths until the geometry of the room changed. The dog knew that too. He could feel it in the animals waiting. The older man took one slow step away from the child and looked into the rain-dark ravine again. "You can keep hiding," he called. "Or you can listen while the little girl still has value." The soldier's jaw tightened. Value. There it was. No pretense. No rescue story gone bad. The child had seen or known something that tied her to this hidden infrastructure, and these men were practical enough to discuss her in the language of cargo. He glanced at her through the reeds. She had not looked back up, but she had heard the voice too, and was listening with the terrible stillness of a frightened child trying not to worsen what adults around her had already turned monstrous. Her bare feet were muddy. One ankle raw where the plastic cord bit into skin. Too thin for the cold damp air. Too tired to fight with motion, but not broken yet. He could tell by the way her shoulders held tension instead of collapse. She was waiting for a chance even if she didn't yet believe one would come. He breathed once through his nose and called back in a voice no louder than necessary, letting the rain do the work of carrying it. "You already know I'm not here to listen." The reaction in the camp was immediate and useful. The smoking guards spun too fast toward the wrong section of reeds. The notebook man flattened behind a crate stack. The radio guard dropped to one knee, trying to triangulate the voice instead of the likely approach lane. Only the older man remained mostly still, and even in that stillness the soldier caught the faint shift in his posture that meant satisfaction rather than surprise. He had wanted confirmation. Now he had it. "No," the man said. "You're here because years ago you walked out of this jungle with questions, and you've never forgiven yourself for not being brave enough to ask the right people the right ones." The soldier felt that one land deeper than he wanted. Memory flashed hard and ugly behind his eyes. Rain against broken metal, a teammate's boot visible under wreckage, a sealed report handed over by a dry-eyed superior who never once spoke the names of the missing dead. He crushed the flash before it could bloom wider. The jungle did not care about his history. The child still tied under the tarp mattered now. "You should have stayed buried with the rest of it," he said. The older man smiled faintly, which made him more dangerous somehow. "And missed the chance to watch your dog bring you back to me." "No." The sentence answered something the soldier had not wanted confirmed. This was no accidental overlap between his old mission and the current rescue. The dog's tracking ability had been accounted for. Anticipated. Maybe even baited. Somewhere inside the old sealed lie, this man had known enough about the original operation to expect the same soldier and the same animal pattern to repeat years later. Except that part didn't track fully. Not unless someone in the current rescue chain had fed him information. Leak inside the search request. Leak inside the official contact line. Which meant every minute delayed here worsened the possibility of outside reinforcements being redirected, ambushed, or poisoned before they ever reached the sector. Good to know. Useless if he died in a drainage ditch. The dog gave the slightest head turn, barely perceptible to anyone who didn't know him as deeply as the soldier did. Left flank. Generator's side. Something there had changed. The soldier let his gaze slide, slow and unfocused, across the camp, as if still locked on the older man. The portable generator sat under its rain hood 20 feet left of the tarp, half shielded by sandbags and a stack of fuel cans. One cable ran from it to the work lights, and another disappeared toward the underground access door. Crude but central. If the generator went dark or blue, half the visible men would move on instinct toward the noise and power loss. The child's tether point lay 3 hard strides from the nearest support post. the dog could cover that in less than 1. The soldier could cover it in 3.5 if the mud held, and knowing got a clean angle. Ugly, but possible. He touched 2 fingers to the ground again, and slid them through the mud in a shape the dog would read the way no human could. Break left. Then center. The German Shepherd vanished completely. Not a rustle. Not a visible shift. Just absence where a living body had been. That was his cue. The soldier rose enough to draw a bead on the radio guard instead of the older man, and fired once. The shot cracked through the ravine like lightning striking metal. The radio guard spun backward into the generator frame before he ever understood he had been targeted. At the exact same instant, the German Shepherd exploded out of the opposite reeds and hit the fuel can guard high in the side, driving him off his feet and into the mud with a sound more like a body being dropped than attacked. Chaos hit the camp in a single convulsive wave. The notebook man shouted and fired blindly toward the ravine edge. The older man dropped and moved with frightening speed toward the child instead of cover, proving everything the soldier had already suspected about priorities. The generator cable sparked as a second round from the soldier ripped through the junction box, and the lights blew out in a spit of white-blue fire that plunged the hidden camp into storm-dark confusion lit only by residual sparks and the wet silver wash of rain. Perfect enough. The soldier came out of the drainage line at a sprint, mud flying off his boots, rifle already slung because speed mattered more now than precision. The child looked up just as the older man reached for her arm. The soldier hit him shoulder first before the hand fully closed, and both men crashed sideways into the tarp support hard enough to shake water and leaf litter down over the entire scene. Somewhere to the left the dog snarled with full committed violence now, not holding a line but finishing one. Somewhere behind the crate stack the notebook man worked a bolt or mag under panic. Somewhere above on the catwalk a 6th unseen shooter racked a weapon that had not yet entered the fight. The soldier knew all that in the same split second he rolled, got one hand on the child, and felt the older man drive a knife toward his ribs in the dark. What if the moment you finally reached the child was also the exact moment the jungle revealed how completely trapped you had been from the beginning? The soldier felt that truth hit him at the same instant he caught the little girl around the shoulders and dragged her clear of the falling tarp, because the hidden camp did not break apart under panic the way ordinary men's camps did. It shifted, adapted, redirected. Even in darkness and rain and the sudden violence of the dog's attack, there was structure in the way the gunfire changed lanes, structure in the way one shooter abandoned the crate stack and moved not to escape but to cut off the ravine side. Structure in the way the unseen man above on the catwalk did not fire blindly into the confusion, but waited for the moment the child and the rescuer separated cleanly enough to make a single shot matter. The soldier rolled with the girl under him, felt the older man's knife slash through wet fabric instead of flesh by less than an inch, and drove his elbow backward hard enough to crack bone or teeth before shoving both himself and the child behind a concrete support base where runoff water cascaded off broken metal overhead. The little girl made one small strangled sound, not even a full scream now, just the involuntary noise of someone whose body had run out of safe places to put fear. Her face was all mud, rain, and hunger. Her eyes were too large for the rest of her, too aware, and fixed on him with the kind of desperate disbelief children wore only when rescue arrived after they had almost stopped believing it could. "Can you run?" he asked, cutting the zip cord at her ankle with one fast draw of the knife. She shook her head immediately, not because she was weak, but because terror had taught her honesty faster than hope. "Then stay under me when I move." Another shot cracked from above and shattered concrete near his shoulder. The catwalk shooter had finally found angle. Good. That made one problem visible. The German Shepherd burst through the rain dark on the left flank, released from the man he had taken down near the fuel cans, and redirected instantly toward the catwalk support instead of the closest body. Smart dog. Better than smart. The animal had already read the same battlefield he had. The hired gun was the real threat now. The soldier snatched the child tighter against him, sprinted bent low across 6 feet of open mud, and slid behind the generator housing just as the catwalk shooter opened up with a short burst that stitched sparks, leaves, and hot fragments through the darkness where they had been. The generator, already damaged by the earlier shot, spat light and coughed under the impact. The whole camp plunged into a harsher half-dark, lit only by occasional electrical sputters, storm flashes filtering through the canopy, and the weak glow of one work lamp still hanging crooked near the underground access door. That light was enough. He saw the older man regain his footing on the far side of the tarp frame, knife still in hand, calm even now, eyes not on the soldier but on the child. He was measuring paths, exit routes, the possibility of losing her. He was not angry. Men like that were worse when they stayed controlled. They did not make mistakes out of emotion. They made decisions. The soldier fired once from behind the generator. Not to hit the older man cleanly. The angle was bad. But the shot forced him to break line and retreat behind the steel access frame, which bought seconds. Seconds where all rescues were made of in places like this. The child was shivering violently now, not just from wet and fear, but from the crash of adrenaline after long helplessness. He looked at her properly for the first time. Bare feet torn by rock and mud. One sleeve ripped almost to the shoulder. A bruise at the jawline where someone had handled her too hard. She could not have been older than 8. "Listen to me," he said, voice low and flat while the camp tore itself apart around them. "When I move, you hold my jacket and don't let go. No matter what." She swallowed and nodded too fast. Good enough. Behind them, the wounded surveyor on the ridge finally fired from his hiding place. One raw, frightened shot down into the basin that went wide but served its purpose by dragging the notebook shooter's attention upslope. The catwalk gun shifted too, briefly uncertain whether a second assault team had entered from above. Perfect. The soldier used the distraction at once. "Go!" he snapped to the dog, and the German shepherd launched not upward this time, but through the support structure itself, vanishing under the twisted remains of the catwalk stairs and reappearing a second later on the platform with all the terrifying speed of a working animal who had stopped pretending this was still reconnaissance. The shooter above got half a curse out before the dog hit him low and drove him backward through rusted railing into darkness and rain. The fall ended in a heavy crash beyond the camp edge. No more shots from above. The soldier moved immediately, dragging the child with him around the generator's dead side and toward the drainage break at the camp's north edge. It should have worked. In another camp, against lesser men, it would have. But the older man had anticipated that exact route. He stepped out of the steel access doorway 10 feet ahead, not rushing, not shouting, just raising the sidearm he had kept hidden until now, with the steady confidence of someone who knew the line was clean and the moment belonged to him. The soldier pivoted, trying to throw his own body across the child's, but the shot never came. Instead, the older man's wrist snapped violently to one side as the German shepherd hit him from the blind angle, having abandoned the catwalk body and crossed the camp faster than thought. The pistol discharged into wet dirt. The older man staggered, knife dropping from his other hand, and for the first time something human and ugly crossed his face. Not fear exactly, but insult. He had not underestimated the soldier. He had underestimated the dog. That mistake cost him control. The soldier closed the distance in 2 strides, struck the weapon arm once to kill the grip, then drove the butt of the rifle into the man's sternum hard enough to throw him backward into the steel doorframe. Metal rang. Breath left him. The child ducked instinctively and clung tighter to the back of the soldier's jacket exactly as ordered. Good child. Good, brave, exhausted child. From the crate line, the surviving shooter finally got smart and fired toward the generator housing and drainage break both, forcing the soldier lower. Rounds ripped through tarp canvas and punctured fuel tins. Diesel smell flooded the air. Dangerous now. Very dangerous. One spark in the wrong place, and the whole hidden camp would become a fire trap. The older man understood that too. Winded, half-bent, one arm failing, he still managed a grim smile through the rain. "You still don't know what she saw," he said. The soldier wanted to finish him then. Wanted it in the old simple way wounded men sometimes wanted bad things ended. But the child pulled at his jacket just once, a tiny terrified signal that more shapes were moving under the trees beyond the basin. Reinforcements. Or perimeter guards finally collapsing inward. Either way, staying meant losing. He grabbed the child fully into his arms this time, and fell back toward the drainage gap with the dog already covering, step for step, black ant and body between them, and every open angle. The wounded surveyor shouted something from above. Then another shot cracked, and a man near the crate spun down. Good. He was still alive, and still useful. The soldier hit the drainage cut, slid into black runoff up to the knee, caught himself on roots, and kept moving while the child clung to him hard enough to hurt. The dog ran beside them in the trench instead of ahead, head turning constantly, reading rear threat and front terrain at the same time. Behind them, the older man shouted his first true command of the fight, voice stripped now of all calm pretense. "Don't lose the girl." That one sentence told the soldier everything he needed. Whatever the child had seen mattered more than the hidden camp, more than the equipment, more than the men already bleeding in the mud. Which meant her survival was now not just the rescue. It was the whole mission. The trench curved hard under. It was a series of broken ledges, root snags, and volcanic shelves carved by floodwater over years, ugly and unstable but not impossible if taken in sequence, and if one accepted that possible was just another word for pain. The German shepherd had already begun solving it before the man's conscious mind finished. The dog stepped along the lip 3 feet to the right, leaned over, tested the air with his nose, then pawed once at a low jut of stone half hidden by hanging vines. A descent line. Not safe. Just better than the rest. The child trembled harder against the soldier's chest when he shifted her higher. Her arms had become instinct now, locked around him with the desperate strength frightened children sometimes found only when they had no language left for what they felt. "Listen to me," he said, voice low and steady even with the ravine roaring under them. "You don't look down. You hold on and stay still. No matter what happens." She buried her face against his wet jacket and gave one fast, terrified nod. Good enough. He slung the rifle behind him, freed one hand, caught a hanging root, and lowered them over the edge while the dog moved ahead onto the first rock shelf with a precision that made the whole impossible route seem like something the jungle itself had designed for him. Mud sheared away under the soldier's boots immediately. Pebbles rattled into the water below and vanished. The first ledge held. Barely. The second required dropping blind onto a slick slab, while taking the child's weight against his shoulder so the impact would not jar her grip loose. The third wasn't a ledge at all, only a root cluster growing through a crack in the stone wall, thick enough to support his weight if the saturated earth above had not rotted it through. He tested once, then trusted it because trust was all that separated movement from freezing now. Above them a voice shouted from the trench edge. Another answered. Flashlight spill flickered between dripping roots. They had reached the drop and realized too late that direct fire down into the ravine would be useless unless they exposed themselves fully over the lip. Good. Let them hesitate. Let them imagine the fall worse than the pursuit. He needed only seconds. The German shepherd dropped to the next shelf and turned, body low, eyes on the man, not impatient, just utterly certain he would follow. the soldier did. The last descent ended in a slide more than a climb, Booth skidding over wet stone until his shoulder hit the ravine wall hard enough to send white pain across his vision. But he stayed upright, the child stayed in his arms, and the dog landed beside them in the spray just as the first flashlight found the ledge above and swept uselessly over empty stone. Then the ravine took them. The channel below was narrow, violent, and loud enough to make thought feel like another drowned thing. Water surged thigh-deep between black walls slick with algae and roots, breaking white around boulders and pouring through constrictions like liquid muscle. The soldier could not move fast here, not with the child in his arms, and the current punching sideways at his knees every few steps. So he moved with purpose instead. Sideways against the wall where possible, diagonally through shallower tongues of water, when the dog signaled depth ahead, over stone shelves, under hanging root curtains, and once belly flat across a log wedged between the walls, while the flood hammered its underside hard enough to make the entire trunk vibrate. The German shepherd never once left his line. Sometimes the dog took point, springing onto the next rock or rooting out the safer side of a split channel. Sometimes he dropped behind to brace the retreat line with his own body whenever the soldier had to turn sideways or lift the child higher over the water. He did not bark now. He did not waste sound. This had become the purest form of their old partnership, one seeing what the other could not, one trusting without pause, both moving because stopping meant surrendering the outcome to men less worthy of it. Above the ravine, pursuit continued in bursts. Lights appeared and vanished on the rim. Once a round cracked off stone somewhere high and wild, proving one of the smugglers had tried taking a blind shot more from frustration than logic. Another time he heard the older man's voice again, carried down between rain and rock, no longer taunting now, only issuing clipped instructions to split higher and cut the ravine exit. So that was their plan. They would not waste bodies climbing down into the flood for a messy close pursuit. They would run the rim and try to beat him to wherever this channel opened. Smart. Which meant he needed to understand where the ravine went before they did. He slowed once behind a boulder tall enough to hide them, and finally looked properly at the child in his arms. Her lips had gone pale. Mud striped one cheek. Wet hair clung to her forehead and neck. But her eyes were still awake, still trying to be brave through a fear far larger than her body. "Can you talk?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Do you know your name?" A stupid question under better circumstances. A crucial one under these. "Yes." Her voice came thin but intact. "Can you tell me?" She swallowed. "Mara." Good. A name meant orientation. A name meant somebody still lived inside the terror. "Mara," he said, anchoring it into the roar of the ravine, like a stake driven into shifting ground. "You stay with me. We're getting out." Her eyes flicked to the dog, then back to him. "He found me." "Yeah. They said no one could." He looked at the German shepherd standing in the water beside the boulder, shoulders squared into the current, amber eyes fixed downstream through mist and rain. "They were wrong." Something changed in her expression then. Not relief. Relief would come later if it came at all. This was smaller and stronger, belief. Children did not need certainty the way adults thought they did. Often they needed only one true thing to hold inside the dark. The dog had found her. That was true. He built the next move on that truth and pushed out from behind the boulder. The ravine widened after another 200 yards into a lower basin where the current spread into several channels around black stone islands, deadfall, and mats of floating debris. That should have made things easier. Instead it made them worse, because wider ground meant multiple exits, and multiple exits meant multiple possibilities for the men above to cut him off. The German shepherd stopped on a gravel bar barely visible under the flood wash and lifted his head sharply into the wind. Then he turned not downstream but left, toward a gap in the ravine wall where water spilled through a broken man-made opening half hidden by creepers and rockfall. The soldier followed the line and felt his stomach tighten. A culvert. Old concrete, cracked open by time and pressure, built once to carry drainage from some older installation deeper in the jungle. So the hidden camp above had not been a lone outpost after all. It sat on a network. Tunnels, channels, service routes, buried infrastructure repurposed by smarter criminals than the official searchers had ever imagined. That matched too well with the sealed mission from years earlier. The jungle had not swallowed isolated secrets. It had protected a system. The dog splashed toward the culvert at once, then looked back. "Yeah," the soldier muttered. "I see it." The current near the opening pulled hard, creating a sideways drag that nearly took his footing on the first step. He adjusted, turned his body to brake force, and entered the culvert with Mara held high and the rifle scraping concrete above his shoulder. Darkness changed immediately. Outside, the storm had been loud and open. Inside, every sound condensed into echoes and dripping resonance, turning breath, water, and movement into something claustrophobic and close. The tunnel smelled of algae, rust, red droppings, diesel, and long stagnant air recently disturbed by men who believed no one else would ever find this route. Twice he found boot prints on the shallower mud shelf along one side. Recent. Heavy. Armed men had used this exact passage before. The dog tracked the line without hesitation, moving ahead through darkness broken only by the soldier's dim-angled flashlight. Then, 50 yards in, the beam struck something that made him stop so abruptly Mara nearly slid from his arms. A child's backpack. Small, muddy, one strap torn, half hidden against the wall on a dry ledge above the waterline. Mara made a sound then, not fear, not pain, but recognition so immediate it cut through everything else. "Mine." He looked down at her. "They took it from you?" She nodded. "When they brought me down." Her voice shook harder now, because memory was catching up with safety, and deciding not to let it exist cleanly. "They said if I cried they'd throw it away where no one would know I was there." The soldier reached up, snagged the bag off the ledge, and thrust it under one arm without slowing. "Now I know you were here." The sentence mattered more than the object. He saw that in her face. Evidence that someone existed in a place designed to erase them. But the discovery told him something else too. They were on the right line. Not just away from the camp. Through the route by which she had been moved. The dog's nose had found the extraction path in reverse. Good. Very good. Which meant wherever the culvert led might connect to another holding point, another exit, or a lower transport lane. It also meant the older man likely knew this, and was already trying to outrun him over the surface. He killed the light for a second and listened. Above the water. Through the pipe. Somewhere ahead, very faint, he heard the dull repetitive hum of machinery again. Generator or pump. Maybe both. Infrastructure continued. The network ran deeper. He had half a mind to abandon all caution and push the culvert at speed, but a hand the size of his own history closed on that impulse and stopped it. Fastened tunnels got people shot around blind bends. He had learned that in another war, under another mountain, with other men who never came home. So he moved slower, reading seams, side recesses, cable brackets, signs of pressure plates or trip lines if these people were disciplined enough to think like that. Twice the dog stopped and angled around broken grates half submerged in the flow where a human rushing blind might have put a leg through rusted bars and broken bone. Once the dog's head snapped toward a recess on the right wall, and the soldier swung the light just in time to catch a thin wire stretched knee-high across a service nook. Not a military-grade trap. Crude, but attached to hanging scrap metal and fuel cloth positioned to create noise and flame if triggered. Alarm, not kill. Good dog. He stepped over it and kept moving. The culvert opened at last into a chamber that should not have existed this deep under a flooded ravine. A low-service room or drainage nexus built of old reinforced concrete, cracked by roots, half submerged, and lit by a single industrial lamp hung above an inner steel gate. Pipes ran along the walls. A rusted ladder climbed towards some unseen hatch. Mud and recent footprints marked the drier platform beyond the waterline. There were no men visible at first glance. That was what made him freeze. Men who owned routes like this did not leave junction points empty unless they planned for emptiness to work as bait. The dog gave the smallest growl and looked not at the gate, not at the ladder, but at a shape slumped against the left wall beneath the lamp. Human. Bound. Small again. The soldier's pulse jumped before reason crushed it. Not another child. Too broad in the shoulders. An adult. He shifted closer through the knee-deep water and lifted the light. The bound figure raised his head into the glare with a blood-caked forehead and eyes gone wide at the sight of him. Not one of the surveyors. Not one of the camp guards either. County search uniform. Local deputy or forest response officer. Alive. Barely. Gagged. One wrist twisted wrong. Whoever ran this jungle had been collecting more than one problem. Then the steel gate clanged from the other side. Not opening. Locking. And the older man's voice came through the speaker grill mounted high in the concrete above them, calm again now, amplified thinly by age and bad wiring. "You're good," he said. "Better than I wanted you to be. But now you know what the dog found. The question is whether you know which life you can still save." What would you do if the man hunting you finally stopped pretending the rescue was simple and forced you to understand that in this jungle, every saved life might cost another? The old speaker above the steel gate crackled once, then went quiet except for the hum of the industrial lamp and the steady rush of water feeding through the culvert chamber. The soldier stood knee-deep in the black runoff with the child in his arms, the German shepherd rigid at his side, and the bound county officer slumped against the wall under the light like some broken warning left there on purpose. The older man's question hung in the damp air not because it was clever, but because it was built from a truth men like him use better than most. When fear narrowed a room, people started thinking in losses instead of exits. The soldier refused that at once. He did not answer the speaker. He did not look toward the gate or the ladder or the bloody deputy, as if forced to choose one by one. He turned instead to the dog, because the dog had been right about every invisible thing in this jungle so far, and in places designed by liars, trust was often the only clean tool left. The German shepherd had gone utterly still, nose slightly lifted, not reading the speaker, not reacting to the gate, but searching the chamber itself. The dog moved first toward the bound officer, then veered left before reaching him, choosing the wall seam behind a tangle of broken conduit and old pipe brackets instead. He sniffed once, scratched lightly at the concrete base, and looked back. Not a warning. A find. The soldier stepped toward him carefully, Mara still clinging to his jacket, and swept the light low over the wall. At first, he saw only cracks, algae stains, rust streaks, and roots that had forced themselves through the concrete over decades. Then the beam found the detail no panic man would notice in that moment. A hairline opening, not natural, running in a rectangle from ankle height to chest height behind the conduit run. A maintenance panel. Old. Almost fused shut by time and moisture. Hidden in plain sight. The German shepherd nosed the lower edge once more, and then shifted to face the chamber behind them, body preparing automatically to cover whatever came next. Good dog. The soldier looked at Mara. Her small fingers were locked in his jacket, so tightly they had gone pale. Her face was thin, muddy, exhausted, but her eyes were awake and fixed on him with a child's terrible willingness to believe the adult she chose to trust. "Can you stand for 10 seconds?" he asked. She swallowed. If he stays. The dog immediately pressed against her leg. The answer almost broke something in him because of how simple it was. Not if the tunnel is safe. Not if we're almost out. Not if you promise. Just if he stays. He stays, the soldier said. He set her carefully on the driest shelf he could find beside the hidden panel and turned to the bound deputy. The man was in his late 30s maybe, face swollen, lips split, uniform soaked and half torn open, one wrist clearly broken and tied awkwardly behind him. His eyes flicked between the child, the dog, and the soldier with the frantic hope of someone who had spent too long waiting for help to arrive in any shape at all. The gag came off in one hard pull. Don't use the gate, the deputy rasped immediately. His voice sounded flayed raw. Pressure lock. They flood the lower chute if they need to. The soldier crouched beside him, knife already cutting rope. How many deeper in? I saw 4 in the pump corridor. Maybe more rotating upper routes. He winced hard as the rope fell from the broken wrist. They moved the others. Others? The deputy's expression twisted. 2 more civilians. I never got names. 1 hurt bad. 1 may be already dead. So the child had not been their only prisoner. The mission kept widening, darker with every new room. Why keep them alive? The soldier asked. The deputy looked toward the speaker grill with naked hatred. Because they saw the transport ledgers. Because they walked into the wrong drainage cut during the storm. Because this whole jungle route isn't just smuggling. He swallowed blood and rainwater and kept going. It's handoff. Weapons, yes. But also maps, access codes, maintenance keys, county infrastructure. Quiet stuff. Important stuff. The old sealed mission clicked harder into place in the soldier's head. Years ago, his unit hadn't just stumbled into contraband routes. They had brushed against a buried network tied to infrastructure and silence, something valuable enough to erase with military paperwork and classified grief. Now the same system had evolved, gone local, grown roots into county channels, and forgotten jungle structures, and this child somehow sat at the center of its newest breach. The speaker crackled again above him. You're wasting time, the older man said. The little girl knows what's under the pumping lines. Your deputy knows the road leak. And if you keep digging, you'll lose them all. The soldier finished cutting the last restraint and finally looked up toward the grill. If you wanted leverage, you wouldn't be warning me. No answer for a beat. Then, almost amused, still sharper than grief should have left you. The deputy tried to rise and nearly collapsed. The soldier caught him under the shoulder and dragged him closer to the wall. Broken wrist, cracked rib maybe, dehydrated, probably useless in a sprint, but not mentally gone. Good enough. Can you walk? He asked. With hate, the deputy said through clenched teeth. That was almost enough to earn respect. The maintenance panel took force to open. Not explosive force. Persistent, ugly, practical force. The soldier wedged the pry bar scavenged from the chamber floor into the seam, while the deputy braced the conduit with his good hand, and together they heaved until Russ screamed and the rectangle shifted inward by 2 inches, then 4, then finally enough for cold black air to breathe out from the gap. A narrow service passage lay beyond. Dry compared to the culvert. Tight. Unlit. Thick with dust, rat droppings, and the stale smell of concrete places no one had touched in years except, perhaps, the smartest kind of criminals. The dog stuck his head through first, sniffed, then withdrew and looked back once. Clear for now. The speaker crackled a 3rd time, and this time the older man abandoned games. If you take that line, you're heading deeper, not out. You understand that, don't you? The soldier did understand. Old maintenance passages didn't lead conveniently to freedom. They led to structure. To pump controls, spill chambers, service vaults, and hidden junctions. Deeper meant closer to whatever this jungle system really was. It also meant closer to the other civilians if the deputy was right. And maybe closer to the truth his old mission died around. Mara tugged lightly at his sleeve. He looked down. Her voice came barely above a whisper. "There's a room with red lights." The chamber seemed to narrow around the sentence. He crouched to her height. "What room?" Her eyes drifted not to the speaker or the gate, but to the darkness inside the passage. "They took me through it. There were pipes. And cages. And one man was hurt and couldn't stand. And there was a red blinking light over a big metal door." Her lower lip trembled once, but she held the line. "I heard water under the floor." The deputy looked at the soldier. "Pump corridor." So the child didn't just know something abstract. She had physically seen part of the lower complex. Which meant the older man wasn't hunting her out of simple witness panic anymore. She could identify the exact zone where more prisoners or evidence might still be held. The soldier stood. That was the moment the mission changed again. Until now the rescue had been extract the child, survive the jungle, maybe get answers if the road gave them. But every room had widened the cost of leaving. An injured deputy. 2 more civilians deeper in. An old network tied to his dead mission and current county corruption. If he backed out through the ravine now, maybe he saved the child and maybe himself. But the older man would flood routes, move prisoners, burn ledgers, kill whoever remained useful, and vanish back into the same buried machine that had already swallowed too many lives. The dog watched his face the way only long loyal animals could, reading not logic but direction from something deeper than expression. "You know what this is," the deputy said quietly. The soldier did. It was the same kind of mission that had destroyed him years earlier. Bad ground, hidden infrastructure, compromised chains above, civilians trapped inside a system bigger than the official map. The difference now was that he was no longer a younger man obeying sealed orders from people who lied. Now the choice belonged to him. He looked at Mara first. "Can you be brave a little longer?" She nodded immediately because children in terror often nodded before their bodies believed them. He put one hand lightly on the German shepherd's neck. "Guard her." The dog leaned once against the child, then reoriented toward the service passage, ready to move but anchored to her. The deputy saw the direction of his thinking and shook his head weakly. "You can't take her deeper." "No," the soldier said. "I'm not." He swept the chamber again and found what he needed. A raised maintenance recess behind the collapsed conduit bank, half hidden, dry enough, narrow enough, defensible from one direction. Not ideal. Better than dragging a child into a lower pump complex built by men who used flood controls as weapons. He moved her there quickly, wrapped her in the driest tarp strip he could find, gave her the recovered backpack to hold against her chest, and placed the German shepherd directly across the entrance. Mara grabbed the dog's harness with both hands. "Don't leave him." The soldier met her eyes. "He stays until I come back. Promise?" The word struck again, the same way it always did, like a blade finding scar tissue. But the jungle had already burned too much hesitation out of him tonight. "Yeah," he said. "I promise." The dog's gaze shifted from the child to him, accepting the assignment with a seriousness that felt almost human. The deputy stared at the arrangement. "You're leaving your best fighter with her." The soldier checked his rifle, pocketed the deputy's spare mag, and adjusted the knife. "No," he said. "I'm leaving my best reason to come back fast." The speaker above them crackled once more, softer now, almost conversational. "You really are going deeper." The soldier stepped into the narrow service passage and disappeared from the chamber's light. The deputy beside him, the hidden panel dragged almost shut behind them. His answer floated back through the dark. "You should have never taken the child." What would you do if every step deeper into the jungle's hidden underworld felt less like moving forward and more like walking directly into the lie that had already ruined your life once before? The retired soldier felt that with almost painful clarity the moment the maintenance panel dragged mostly shut behind him, and the weak chamber light disappeared, because the darkness inside the service passage was not natural darkness. It was man-made neglect, old concrete, stale trapped air, and the kind of hidden architecture that only existed where people once planned to move things quietly, and never wanted the surface world asking what those things were. The flashlight beam he kept low and tight cut across narrow walls sweating with condensation, rusted cable conduits, pressure valves gone green with age, and warning stencils half-eaten by time and mildew. The floor was dry in places, slick in others, slanting down just enough that he could hear water moving somewhere beneath the concrete, not like a stream, but like contained force, channels, pump lines, control gates, something engineered and still partially alive. Beside him, the deputy moved with one hand pressed against the wall, and the broken wrist held tight to his chest, breathing through pain in short measured pulls that told the soldier the man was still running mostly on discipline and anger. Good. Pain didn't frighten him. Men giving up did. The passage was barely wide enough for them to move shoulder to shoulder, so they advanced in a staggered file with the soldier ahead and the deputy half a step behind. Every 10 feet or so the soldier stopped, listened, checked corners, then moved again. He was not afraid of the dark itself. He was afraid of what competent men could do inside it. Old service tunnels loved ambushes, loved hard angles, blind junctions, echo confusion, and all the ways fear could make an armed person hurry right into the center of a room they should have read first. He had buried brothers in places like this. Not this exact structure, but its cousins. Underground hydro stations in the mountains, failed extraction corridors in enemy country, storm culverts repurposed into transit lanes by men who understood that all decaying infrastructure eventually became useful to criminals, or governments, or both. The geometry of those places never changed. Only the names on the dead did. The deputy finally spoke after 20 yards of silence. "If you're wondering whether I know the way, the answer is not enough." The soldier didn't look back. "How'd they take you?" "Search line collapse." The deputy's voice scraped like sandpaper against the narrow dark. "We came in after the survey team missed check-in. Upper sector. Weather already bad. My partner found an old drainage cut that wasn't on our active county map, which should have been the first warning. We pushed anyway because we heard what sounded like a child." He let out one short ugly breath. "Wasn't a child. Was a recording through a speaker hidden in the tree line." The soldier absorbed that without outward reaction. "They baited responders." "Yeah. How many saw the route?" "Me, my partner, and one volunteer tracker who bolted when the first shot started. Don't know if he made it out." Another pause. "My partner didn't." That was all the explanation needed. The jungle had layers now. Visible terrain for honest people. Hidden routes under that for men who profited from confusion. And bait lines between them to make sure the right kinds of pursuers died where paperwork could later blame weather, topography, or bad luck. The passage bent sharply left and ended at a grated overlook above a larger corridor washed in weak red emergency light. Mara had been right. Red blinkers mounted every 20 feet along the ceiling through a pulsing industrial glow over pipes thicker than tree trunks, steel support ribs, drainage channels, and a row of cage-like holding partitions built against one wall out of welded mesh and reinforced doors. One cage stood empty. One held piles of tarp and equipment. One farther down had a man in it. Alive. Barely. The soldier dropped to one knee behind the grate and brought the flashlight off. From here the corridor opened into a broader pump nexus beyond, where huge intake valves and flood control mechanisms disappeared into shadow. The low vibration he had felt underfoot earlier was louder here, coming from motors or water pressure somewhere deeper in the system. He counted visible threats automatically. One armed guard seated near a control box with his rifle across his lap, half attentive in the kind of posture that came when men thought the lower levels belonged entirely to them. Another moving between stacked supply drums and a rolling cart near the cage line. No sign yet of the older man. No sign of a larger team. That meant two things. Either the route commander still believed the culvert chamber and gate had bought him more time than they had, or he was setting something worse farther inside. The deputy crouched beside him and looked through the grate. His face changed instantly when he saw the caged figure. "That's one of the surveyors." The soldier studied the prisoner more carefully. Male. Mid-30s maybe. Shirt torn open and stiff with dried blood. One shoulder strapped in a rough field bandage. Face bruised, one eye half swollen shut, beard grown and messy over days instead of design. Alive, but flattened by dehydration and pain. More importantly, conscious enough that when the red light pulsed brighter for one cycle, his head lifted and turned slightly toward the upper grate as though he had sensed movement where no one should have been. So, one of the civilians remained alive. Maybe the one Mara said couldn't stand. "Can you make a shot through the grate?" the deputy whispered. "Yeah." "Then do it." The soldier did not. Not because he lacked the angle. The seated guard could be killed from here with one round through the left eye if the pulse light held long enough. The moving guard could be hit second if he panicked right. But a shot in an underground corridor meant alarm through the whole system before he reached the cage, and if there were flood controls tied to the command structure, the older man might choose to lock doors or drown sections without hesitation. A quiet takedown was the better chance. Quieter also meant slower. And slower meant Mara remained in that hidden chamber above with only the dog between her and anyone who found the panel line. The thought sat in his chest like a stone heated in a fire. He trusted the German shepherd more than he trusted the deputy beside him, more than he trusted any rescue team still trying to feel out a jungle already compromised from the inside. But trust did not erase time. It only gave purpose to risk. He studied the great mounts. Old hinges. Upper latch rusted but not sealed. Service access from above. Good. He slipped the knife under the latch lip and worked it gently until corrosion flaked loose in tiny orange fragments. It took 30 slow, brutal seconds that felt like 10 minutes. During those seconds, the moving guard stopped twice, once to piss lazily into the drainage channel, and once to glance toward the deeper pump chamber, as if waiting for orders or relief. The seated guard scratched his jaw, shifted his rifle, and stared into middle distance with the boredom of a man who no longer believed danger could surprise him underground. That kind of boredom got people killed. The latch finally gave with a soft tick. The soldier looked at the deputy. "When I drop, you hold. No shooting unless I miss." The deputy's expression said he hated the order. Good. Hated orders were often remembered better. He nodded. The soldier opened the grate just enough to slip through and lowered himself onto the catwalk rail one careful inch at a time. The red light pulsed again. He timed the drop to the dim part between flashes and landed behind the seated guard without a sound the guard ever recognized as danger. One arm over the mouth. Knife under the jawline. Fast. Quiet. Certain. He lowered the body before the rifle could clatter. The moving guard heard something anyway, not enough to alarm, just enough to turn. The soldier took 2 steps and met him before his brain reached fear. One strike to the throat. One to the solar plexus. The guard folded around empty air, and the soldier caught him by the vest and eased him into the wall. Quiet enough. He signaled the deputy down. The deputy descended slower, pain ridding his balance, but not his usefulness. Together they crossed to the cage while the prisoner inside tried and failed to stand. Up close, the civilian smelled of blood, fever, and stale concrete. His lips cracked when he tried to speak. "Who later?" the soldier said, working the cage lock. "Can you walk?" The answer came as a raw, dry laugh that ended in a cough. "Not far." "Of course not." The deputy looked down the corridor toward the deeper pump chamber, then back at the soldier. "This is going bad fast." "It was always bad." The cage opened with a reluctant squeal, and the surveyor nearly fell into them when his knees buckled. The soldier got an arm around him, shifted the man's weight, and for one fraction of a second the whole rescue almost looked manageable. 2 guards down. 1 civilian recovered. Path back to Mara still open, maybe. Then a siren began. Not loud. Not overhead. Deep in the walls. A low hydraulic warning tone rolled through the corridor as red lights shifted to a faster pulse. Somewhere beyond the pump chamber, machinery changed pitch and heavy valves began moving. The deputy went white. "Flood sequence," he said. The soldier's gaze snapped to him. "How long?" The deputy listened once to the deeper mechanisms, and the answer he gave was worse than panic. "Not long enough." What would you do if the people hunting you decided they did not need to beat you with bullets anymore because the tunnels themselves could finish the job faster? The low hydraulic siren rolled through the corridor again, deeper this time, followed by a violent mechanical shudder somewhere beyond the pump chamber that changed the feel of the floor under their boots. It was not imagination. The whole lower system had come alive around them. Old motors were turning. Gates were shifting. Pressure was being redirected through channels no civilian map had ever shown, and no honest county team had ever been told existed. The red emergency light snapped from a slow pulse to a rapid strobe that painted the concrete in a rhythm too close to panic, and then the first spillway vent along the far wall coughed a hard stream of water into the drainage trench. The deputy's face lost what little color he still had. He had seen enough of these systems from the county side to understand the difference between ordinary storm routing and deliberate kill design. "They're not flooding the whole complex," he said, voice flat with horror because now that he knew it, he wished he didn't. "They're segmenting it, driving us where they want." The soldier shifted the half-conscious surveyor's weight higher across his shoulder and looked toward the deeper pump chamber, where the corridor widened into shadows, valves, ladders, and reinforced doors. "Which way is out?" The deputy laughed once under his breath, bitter and broken. "That's exactly the problem. If they're opening lower chutes and closing upper lock gates, the nearest way out is probably the way they want us taking." The water line in the drainage channel rose another inch before either man moved. The question was no longer whether the older man knew they had breached the lower level. He knew. He had likely triggered the sequence the moment the speaker in the culvert chamber went silent or the first guard missed a check response. This was not an improvised reaction. It was a procedure. Something tested. Something built into the architecture of the place because men like him had spent years imagining how to turn old infrastructure into a selective grave. The recovered surveyor clung weakly to consciousness, boots dragging, one arm slung around the soldier's neck more by reflex than strength. Up close, he looked even worse than first impression allowed, skin burning under fever, lips split, one side of the torso bandaged with a crude pressure wrap already darkening through. He smelled like infection and stale fear. Useful as a witness, dead weight as a mover. But leaving him behind would not just be an abandonment. It would be a decision the older man had counted on, another forced narrowing of compassion into efficiency. The soldier had spent too many years living with the aftertaste of those calculations. Not tonight. Not if he could still physically carry the cost. "Names?" he asked the surveyor while they started moving, because orientation sometimes kept the wounded conscious a little longer. The man blinked slowly, as if surfacing through mud. "I'm here," he mumbled. "Not what I asked." A long second passed. Then, thought nobody would get this far. "That's still not your name." Something in the man's face almost shifted toward a smile before pain flattened it again. "Good," he whispered, and then gave the name in a voice the siren nearly swallowed. The soldier did not repeat it. Names in places like this always felt too heavy once spoken. The dog was not with him. That fact sat under everything like a buried blade. He had left the German shepherd with Mara in the hidden chamber because the child had needed more than a promise. She had needed a living wall between herself and the jungle system built to consume her. He would make the same decision again. He knew that rationally. But knowing it did nothing to quiet the instinct clawing at him now that the lower complex had shifted into active trap mode. Somewhere above and behind, in a half-hidden maintenance recess off a culvert chamber, his dog was holding a frightened child against whatever men or routes or secondary teams the older man might still command. The soldier trusted the animal with his life. He had, in fact, trusted him with it more than once. But trust was not the same as calm. Every new minute inside the lower levels made getting back to Mara and the dog less certain. Every mechanical gate that closed could become a wall between them. The deputy limped ahead now, leading by memory and fragments rather than certainty. The lower corridor split around a massive intake housing where thick pipes disappeared into the floor and walls like buried tree trunks made of iron. Water sprayed in fine cold mist from valve seams as pressure built. The red strobes made depth hard to read, but the deputy pointed left with his good hand. Service bridge over the sump basin. Then maybe a maintenance ladder to the upper storm galleries. Maybe. The word had become the knight's real commander. They moved left. The service bridge was a grated steel span crossing a circular black basin where floodwater churned 30 feet below in unseen motion. The moment the soldier's boots hit the metal, he understood why the older man had allowed this route to remain physically possible. The bridge offered the only crossing in that section. It also offered no cover, no concealment, and nowhere to go if someone held the far side. He stopped dead and killed his light entirely, letting only the red pulses and the cold mist define the room. The deputy almost walked into him. "What?" "Listen." For 2 beats there was only siren, water pressure, and the vibration of old machinery laboring awake. Then another sound slid through the metal chamber, soft, deliberate, and almost lost beneath everything else. A boot's sole shifting against steel. Far side. Someone waiting. The soldier lowered the surveyor carefully onto the concrete lip beside the bridge entrance and signaled the deputy down. The wounded man obeyed immediately. Good. Learning. The soldier looked over the edge of the sump basin. One maintenance ladder descended along the inner wall into blackness, but the lower rungs vanished in spray, and the shaft below pulsed with floodwater movement strong enough to tear a body off steel if the wrong gate opened. Not a route. Not with civilians. He studied the bridge again. No side catwalks. No alternate traverse. One way only. "Can you throw?" he whispered to the deputy. The deputy understood immediately and handed over the fallen guard's flashlight without comment. The soldier thumbed it on and slid it low across the grating instead of tossing it high. The beam skittered forward over metal bars, bouncing off mist and railings until it spun halfway across. Then the far side shooter reacted exactly as anticipated. One sharp burst punched down into the light source, sparks flashing off the grating. Position confirmed. The soldier fired once at the muzzle flash and moved before the echo died, low and fast onto the bridge with the rifle shouldered, and the world narrowed to rails, red pulse, and the geometry of death. The far side gunman had expected a longer pause after his burst. That half-second misread was enough. The soldier dropped to one knee midspan and fired again through the spray where the body should be leaning. A cry answered and metal clanged as a rifle went over the rail into the sump. He surged the rest of the way across before the man could recover, hitting the far platform just as a wounded body tried to rise behind a valve column. The older guard reached for a sidearm. The soldier kicked the wrist, drove the buttstock into the throat, and pinned him to the wall. "How many deeper?" he asked. The guard spat blood and grinned despite it. Wrong answer. Wrong type of man. Ideology or fear had already taken him too far from self-preservation. The soldier hit him once more, not enough to kill, enough to end the conversation forever, and motioned the deputy across with the surveyor. Crossing the bridge with a half-delirious civilian and a broken-wrist deputy, while the flood system activated beneath him took longer than his nerves could afford. Twice the lights flickered out entirely for a second and came back blood-red. Once the basin below boomed with a gate release so violent the whole bridge shook under their feet. But they made the far side, and the deputy almost collapsed with relief until the soldier grabbed his shoulder and pointed upward. Fresh footprints in the mist on the maintenance stair, leading up. And something else with them. A streak on the rail. Dark even in the red light. Blood. The deputy saw it too. Could be one of ours. Could be. Could also be bait. Yeah. The soldier lifted the surveyor again and began climbing. The stairs rose through a vertical shaft lined with old electrical conduit, rusted control boxes, and maintenance tags from years long dead. Red light bled up from below while colder gray-white utility light leaked down from somewhere above. Halfway up, the shaft opened onto a grated landing where a steel door stood ajar by less than an inch. Blood had been smeared there too, not much, but enough to say somebody wounded had gone through recently or been dragged. The dog would have known instantly which. The soldier hated how much he missed that certainty in moments like this. He listened at the seam. Nothing. That alone made him suspicious. Rooms that should have been noisy, and weren't usually contained men trying very hard to become surprises. He eased the door wider with the rifle muzzle. Beyond lay a control gallery overlooking the upper storm gates of the entire lower system. A long industrial room of levers, valve wheels, broken consoles, pressure gauges, and window slits staring out over roaring water channels cut directly through the jungle bedrock. Rain banged against unseen upper vents. Floodlights flickered through cracked safety glass. And tied to a pipe run beneath one of the consoles, wrists bound and mouth bloodied, sat the volunteer tracker the deputy had thought might have escaped. Alive. Young. Shaking. Wild-eyed. The moment he saw them, he tried to speak around the gag and only managed a strangled broken sound. The deputy swore softly. He made it. The soldier didn't answer because he had already seen the detail that mattered more. The far valve console had been manually locked into sequence. And hanging above it on a wire loop, swaying gently in the damp air, was the German Shepherd's old brass training tag. Not there by accident. A message. He stared at it for 1 second too long. The tag was unmistakable. Scratched edge, worn corner, the tiny bite mark from years back when the dog as a young working animal had chewed his own gear in a transport crate. The soldier had replaced that tag months ago after the ring cracked, which meant someone had removed the old one from his stored field kit or from someplace even more private. The older man had known about the dog before this mission. Known about him before the jungle. Known enough to leave that tag here and tell him, without speaking, that none of this had ever been random. The volunteer tracker finally tore the gag loose enough to spit it from his mouth. "They took the little girl," he gasped. The room seemed to narrow. The soldier crossed to him in 3 strides. "When?" "Minutes, maybe. I don't know." Panic shook through every word. "A dog attacked one of them upstairs. Then they came through another hatch. I heard the child crying, and the man laughing. They said if you reached the lower galleries, they'd let you get just close enough to choose wrong. The deputy went pale. There's another lift route from the culvert chamber. Of course there was. The older man had never been defending one line. He had been building a maze of morally impossible priorities. Child here, deputy there, surveyor below, floodgate ahead, forcing the rescuer to divide himself until the right thing and the survivable thing became harder to tell apart. And now he had Mara again. Or had her moving through some parallel route with a dog in pursuit. The volunteer grabbed the soldier's sleeve. There's a bypass to the upper spill galleries. I heard them say it. Red corridor. West valve track. The soldier cut the man's wrists free, turned to the deputy, and made the decision before fear could complicate it. You take both civilians and shut that flood sequence down if you can. The deputy stared at him like he'd been handed a live explosive. By myself? You've got him, the soldier said, jerking his chin at the free tracker. And if you don't, the whole lower system becomes a coffin. What about you? The soldier looked at the brass tag swaying above the valve console, and then toward the narrow west passage marked by faded stenciling under a blinking red lamp. What about me? He said quietly. Is that somebody took my dog and my child in the same minute? He turned into the red corridor alone. And for the first time that night, the men underground were no longer controlling the rescue. They were being hunted by the one thing more dangerous than a veteran with a mission. A veteran with something to get back. What would you do if the only thing louder than the floodgates beneath the jungle was the certainty that the people below had just made the worst mistake of their lives by separating you from the one creature who had never failed you? The retired soldier did not slow when he entered the red corridor, because speed had stopped being recklessness the moment the older man took Mara and forced the German shepherd onto a parallel line. The corridor itself felt less like part of a storm system and more like the spine of something secret and old, a reinforced service artery running west through the mountain under layers of jungle and concrete, its walls lined with dead gauges, rusted junction boxes, old emergency phones, and red utility lamps that blinked at uneven intervals as if the entire place were breathing through damaged lungs. Water dripped steadily from pipe seams overhead. Condensation ran down the concrete in cold silver lines. Beneath his boots, the vibration of the machinery changed every few seconds as hidden gates somewhere below opened, shut, redirected, and roared against the weight of stormwater and aging steel. The air smelled of hot dust, algae, oil, and the metallic tang of old places reactivated for ugly purposes. He moved with the rifle high and the flashlight off, using the red pulses for shape and rhythm instead of trusting bright light that would only announce his approach. Somewhere ahead, beyond two bends and a descending ramp, he heard the sound he had been starving for since leaving the culvert chamber, a short, furious burst of barking, muffled by concrete and distance, but unmistakably alive. The dog was still in motion. Good. Better than good. That meant the men holding Mara had not finished the separation cleanly. Somewhere in the west galleries, the older man was still trying to control a rescue that had begun slipping from his hands the second he underestimated what loyalty looked like when cornered. The first body lay face down at the base of the ramp, with blood still moving slowly out from under him into the grated runoff channel. One of the hidden route guards. Young. Dark jungle gear. Head turned at a bad angle against the floor. Throat torn open not by a blade, not by gunfire, but by the kind of force only a trained working dog delivered when speed and fury aligned in one perfect line. The soldier saw the kill, recognized the pattern instantly, and kept moving without slowing. The German shepherd had not stopped to finish him. He had hit, broken the line, and gone after the child. Perfect dog. Perfect impossible dog. 20 feet farther, the corridor split. One route continued level under stenciled arrows half erased by time. The other dropped through a heavy valve arch marked West Spill Access. The soldier knelt once, touched the floor, and found the same thing the dog would have found even if he were blind. Fresh water spray kicked onto the concrete by running feet, a partial smear of mud from a child's bare sole, then a much longer slide where someone had been dragged when exhaustion gave out. Mara had gone down the spill access. So had the dog. So had at least 2 adults, maybe 3 by the overlap of boot pressure and the inconsistent depth in the wet grime. He went after them. The spill access corridor widened abruptly into a low gallery built above a roaring black chute of stormwater racing through open concrete channels below. Metal walkways clung to the side walls over the flood run, some intact, some buckled or patched with ugly field repairs. The red lamps ended here, replaced by rotating amber safety beacons that watched the chamber in a sick industrial pulse. On one side of the gallery, valve wheels the size of truck tires rose from the floor beside massive steel rods disappearing into the concrete. On the other side, graded maintenance stairs climbed and dropped between platforms overlooking the water. It was a maze built for workers who once understood every section and now belonged to men who had turned that understanding into a weapon. Voices echoed somewhere ahead, distorted by the chamber so badly they seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then came another bark. Closer. Followed immediately by a gunshot that ricocheted through the gallery hard enough to make the entire structure sing. He crossed the first catwalk at a sprint and dropped into cover behind a valve housing, just as 2 more shots slammed sparks out of the rail where his chest had been. Not the older man. 2 hurried. One of the remaining lower guards, panicked by movement and firing at sound. The soldier leaned once, saw the muzzle flash from an upper platform to his right, and answered with one controlled round that ended the problem in a heavy metallic collapse. The echo had barely died when he heard Mara scream. Not the long broken scream of a child first heard. The short desperate cry of one who had already been terrified for too long and had just seen danger move closer again. He rose and pushed deeper into the spill gallery, no longer conserving silence because surprise had burned away. He came around the next housing and finally saw the core of it. At the far end of the chamber, where the main spill channel narrowed under a half-open gate, the older man had forced Mara onto a narrow service platform hanging above the flood run. One arm was locked across her shoulders, not cruelly enough to bruise immediately, but with the clean practiced efficiency of someone who knew exactly how little pressure it took to control a child by fear alone. In his other hand, he held the sidearm low against her ribs. 2 dead floodlights lay shattered near the wall, likely victims of the dog's first attack. One surviving guard crouched on a side stair with a rifle, but no clear shot because the German shepherd stood between them on the platform grating, shoulders high, lips peeled, paws planted, body angled not toward the man with the gun, but toward the older one holding the child. The dog had blood across one cheek, some his, most not. One ear was split and dripping. His harness hung partly twisted from whatever violent path had brought him here. But his eyes were steady. Furious, intelligent, impossibly steady. He had already reached her. He had done what no map, no team, no official route had managed. He had found the child again in the heart of the underground system, and was now the only thing standing between her and the water below. The older man smiled when he saw the soldier step into the open. "There you are," he said, as though greeting someone late to an arranged meeting instead of a man who had crossed flood chambers and blood to get there. The soldier kept the rifle trained center mass and did not answer. The older man's voice rose just enough to carry over the thunder of water. "You see the problem? Every rescue becomes a narrowing. Every choice costs something. It's why men like you fail. You care too much about what you can't keep." Mara's face turned toward the soldier. She was crying now without sound, too far past safety to believe in it easily. But she did not fight the arm around her, because even children understood heights and guns and floodwater. Her fingers were buried in the twisted front of the dog's harness, from where she must have grabbed him the moment he reached her. That detail hit him deeper than the weapon did. She had held on to the one thing she believed would not leave. The guard on the side stair shifted, trying for angle. Bad choice. The dog saw the weight change first and launched. Not at the older man. At the stair shooter. Pure battlefield judgment. He hit the guard so hard both of them crashed through the lower railing into the adjacent service ladder, clanging downward in a blur of fur, boots, and metal. The rifle went off once, into the chamber roof. Mara screamed again. The older man jerked backward, losing the perfect hold for 1 second. 1 second was enough. The soldier fired. Not center mass. Too much risk through the child. He took the shoulder. The round slammed the older man sideways into the platform rail, ripping the gun arm wide. The pistol skidded across wet grating and vanished into the flood. The man did not go down. Of course he didn't. Men like that were built for narrower things. He shoved Mara away from himself in the same motion he used to fall behind the gate mechanism, turning a clean end into another moving problem. The child went hard onto the platform grating, slid toward the edge, caught herself on one hand, and would have gone over if the soldier had been one breath slower. He crossed the distance in a blur, hit the platform on one knee, and caught her by the jacket before the current below could take what the jungle had been trying all night to swallow. She slammed against him, body shaking violently, fingers clawing into his field jacket with desperate blind strength. "I've got you," he said, and the words came out rougher than he intended because relief and fury had collided in his throat. "I've got you." For 1 second, he almost allowed the rescue to become only that. Child alive. Dog somewhere still fighting. Route commander wounded. But the man behind the gate housing had not survived this long by letting seconds go unused. A control lever slammed somewhere beyond the mechanism. Metal groaned. The half-open spilled gate above the flood channel began rising. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Water pressure below changed direction, surging up in a violent boil as the channel beneath the platform widened and the upstream force redirected through the chamber. The entire service platform shuddered under his knees. Somewhere to the left the German shepherd reappeared, dragging himself up from the lower ladder after throwing or forcing the stair gunman into the water below. He was limping now, one hind leg touched or strained, but still moving, still trying to reach them. Then the older man stepped back into view behind the control housing with blood down one arm and a small detonator in his good hand. Not a dramatic bomb trigger. Worse. A compact industrial dead switch tied by cable into the control box itself. "If I die," he said calmly over the roaring gate, "the lower channel's open and everything under this gallery drowns in under 4 minutes." His eyes flicked to the dog, then to Mara, then finally to the soldier. "Your deputy. The civilians. Whatever remains of your evidence. All of it." The soldier's whole body went still. That was the older man's final architecture. Not escape. Not survival. Containment by destruction. He had built himself into the system so completely that killing him wrong would finish the work of the flood sequence faster than any rifle team could. Mara clung tighter against the soldier's chest, unaware of the full mechanics, but aware enough to know that the man she feared was still somehow controlling the room. The German shepherd reached the platform at last and stood beside them again despite the limp, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the detonator hand with a murderous attention the older man finally seemed to understand as personal. The route commander smiled once, thin and tired and terribly sure of himself. "You can save the child," he said, "or you can save everyone else." And for the second time that night, The jungle and all its buried machinery tried to force the soldier into choosing which life mattered most. What would you do if the people who built the trap finally stood in front of you and demanded the one choice they believed could still break you? Save the child in your arms, or save everyone else buried inside the flooding machine beneath the jungle? The retired soldier did not answer the older man at first, because answers were what men like him wanted. Spoken choices. Visible surrender. The clean narrowing of a human being into only two options, when the real world almost never worked that way. Mara was shaking so hard against his chest that he could feel each terrified breath catch and tear through her. The German shepherd stood beside them on the trembling platform, wet black antennae coat slicked to the body, one hind leg favoring slightly after the fight on the ladder, blood across his split ear and one shoulder, but still impossibly focused. Not on the older man's face. Not on the wound in his arm. On the detonator hand. Always the hand. Always the actual threat. Good dog. Perfect dog. The half-raised spill gate thundered above the channel, and the redirected floodwater below had turned from simple force into violent turbulence, white and black and relentless enough to tell the truth of the older man's threat. If that dead switch opened the remaining lower sluices, the pump corridors under the chamber would drown quickly. The deputy. The two civilians. The evidence. Maybe even the route itself if the system fully destabilized. But the child in his arms was not some lesser equation either. She was not a symbolic life. She was a real one, barefoot, bruised, terrified, and breathing because the dog had found tracks no human eye could see and led him through the jungle to her twice. Men like the one across from him always believed morality could be converted into mechanics. Push pressure here, apply fear there, watch compassion divide itself until only failure remained. The soldier had spent too many years letting that kind of structure define his past. Not again. The older man mistook his silence for hesitation and spoke into it with the steady voice of someone who had rehearsed this kind of cruelty in a dozen forms over a dozen years. "You know I'm right," he said. "This is who you are. The man who reaches one person and loses the rest on the way out." There it was. Not just threat now. Intention. The strike at history. The old mission, the sealed report, the unrecovered dead, the years of private guilt built around a retrieval nobody had properly explained. The older man did not know every grave inside him, but he knew enough to press the shape of one. Maybe he had been part of the buried system then. Maybe one of the ones who watched the first operation from behind false coordinates and broken comms. Maybe just a later inheritor who studied old failures and weaponized them against the same survivor. It no longer mattered. The soldier looked once at the detonator, once at the valve housing, once at the dog. The dog gave the slightest head movement, not toward the older man directly, but toward the gate track and the exposed cable junction under the control frame. That was when the answer arrived. Not as hope. Not as luck. As pattern. The older man needed the dead switch to matter. The flood sequence had to remain centralized through that control line long enough for the threat to work. Sever the line at the wrong point, and maybe all the lower chutes opened anyway. Hit the right point, and maybe the trigger died before the command reached the remaining gates. Maybe, there was that word again. But maybe, in the hands of a man and a dog who had survived this long could still become a plan. He eased Mara lower behind the thickest section of platform support and forced her gaze to his face. "When I move, you stay down and hold the rail. No matter what." Her lips trembled. "Don't leave me. I'm not leaving you." He touched her shoulder once, hard enough for certainty, then looked at the dog. "Guard." The German shepherd shifted immediately, placing his body half over Mara, half toward the older man, as if the child and the detonator were the only two things left in the world worth seeing. The older man smiled faintly. "You still think there's a third option?" The soldier finally answered, "No, I know there is." And then he moved. Not at the older man. Not yet. He drove sideways instead, slamming the rifle butt into the exposed valve wheel nearest the platform support with all the force he had left. The wheel spun half a turn before jamming, releasing a violent blast of pressure steam and runoff from a maintenance purge line directly across the chamber. The effect was instant chaos. Visibility shattered. The older man flinched, not from fear, but from involuntary survival reflex as scalding white vapor and freezing spray erupted across the control frame. That single flinch took his eyes off the dog. The German Shepherd launched. He did not go for the throat. He went for the wrist. All those years of working beside the soldier had turned intelligence into something terrifyingly exact. The dog hit the detonator hand at full force, jaws locking over glove, wrist, and lower forearm together. The older man shouted for the first time that night, a raw shock sound stripped of all the calm he had hidden behind. The detonator flew free, clattering across the vibrating platform toward the edge. The soldier was already moving. He slid through water and steam, caught the device 1 foot before it vanished into the flood, and crushed it under the heel of his boot until wires spat and the casing split apart. But the room did not magically stabilize. The half-raised gate was still open. Pressure still hammered the lower channels. Somewhere in the depths below, mechanical systems were already committed to momentum and did not care about human morality any more than the river above did. The older man tore half free of the dog with blood pouring down his arm and reached for the backup knife at his belt. The soldier met him head-on. The collision drove both men into the control housing hard enough to ring steel through the chamber. The knife came up low. The soldier trapped the wrist, felt the edge bite through fabric and skin across his side, ignored it, and drove his forehead into the older man's face. Cartilage gave. Blood burst. The knife slipped. The dog released just in time to avoid the fall and reoriented instantly toward the next threat like a machine built from loyalty instead of metal. The older man hit the grating on one knee, still fighting, still trying to crawl for the control lever with his good hand. A voice crackled from the wall speaker, not the older man now, but the deputy, faint, distorted, fighting static from somewhere deeper in the network. "Upper gallery, if you can hear me, manual override in the west box, red lever, twice down, once back, do it now." The soldier saw the west box immediately, mounted on the far side of the gate track under a shower of water and steam. 10 feet away. Open exposure. One wrong step, and he would be thrown into the flood. He started toward it, but the German Shepherd cut in front of him and barked once, sharp, urgent, not disobedient but directive. Then the dog turned and ran to Mara instead. For one fractured second the soldier thought the dog had read the situation wrong. Then he understood. The child. He could not leave her loose on a platform shaking under flood pressure while he crossed open steel. He dropped back, scooped Mara against the support rail behind the thickest valve housing, stripped the older man's belt free, and looped it around the waist rail to anchor her in place for the 10 seconds he might need. "Hold this," he said, forcing her small hands around the metal. "Eyes on him." He touched the dog's harness. "Stay." The German Shepherd planted himself directly in front of her and lowered his body over her knees. Then the soldier ran. The platform was slick with spray and blood. Twice his boots nearly slipped out from under him. The west box rattled under water impact when he hit it. He yanked the panel open, found the red lever, and pulled it down once. Resistance. Again. Harder. Then back one slot exactly as the deputy had shouted. For one hideous second nothing happened. Then the gate above the flood channel groaned, shuddered, and began descending in a slow grinding crawl that sounded like the mountain itself deciding whether to spare or crush them. The water below changed pitch immediately, dropping from chaotic boil to controlled violence. Not safe. Never safe. But survivable. And because the world was not finished testing him, that was the exact second the side platform anchor gave way under earlier gunfire damage. The section where Mara and the dog waited lurched outward. She screamed. The German Shepherd moved before the metal fully dropped. He planted against the sliding grating and bit the rail strut as if his body alone could hold steel and child by will. It wasn't enough to stop the fall, but it slowed it. Enough. The soldier launched back across the chamber, hit the collapsing platform on the slide, and caught Mara under both arms as the outer section tore free and dropped into the flood run below. For one suspended instant all three of them, man, child, dog, hung between the fixed support and the rushing black water, held by one bit rail, one anchored bolt, and whatever strength still lived in his shoulders and back. The German Shepherd had his jaws locked onto the strap of Mara's backpack, taking part of her weight without hesitation, paws scrambling against wet metal with frantic controlled effort. "Climb!" the soldier roared. Mara tried. Too terrified, too little leverage, too much shaking. The dog shifted his grip from the backpack strap to the sleeve of her torn jacket and pulled upward with him. Together they got her high enough for the soldier to hook an elbow over the surviving rail and heave. Pain tore hot across the knife cut in his side, and the half-healed old injuries he carried from other bad places, but the child came over the lip. The dog came next, scrambling up beside her just as the rest of the broken platform section sheared away entirely and vanished into the flood channel with a thunderous crash. Then it was over. Not the story. Not the paperwork. Not the blood, the buried route network, the county leak, or the list of men who would be arrested once dawn and federal light reached this jungle in full. But the chase. The choice. The machine forcing him to pick one life over another, and calling that inevitability. The deputy's voice crackled through again, clearer now. "Flood stabilizing. Civilians alive. Repeat, civilians alive." The soldier leaned back against the valve housing, chest burning, Mara crushed against him. The German Shepherd pressed hard along both of them, as if trying to physically certify they were all still real. The child was crying openly now, not in terror anymore but in release, the kind of shaking release bodies gave themselves only after the danger truly loosened its grip. He let her cry. Let the dog lick mud and water from her hand. Let himself breathe once, then again. By the time federal teams finally reached the upper spill galleries through routes the deputy had reopened, and the lower survivors were brought out under harsh flood lamps and dawn-gray light, the jungle had begun giving the world back piece by piece. The hidden camp above was secured. The route ledgers were recovered before fire could take them. The old infrastructure maps and maintenance codes tied to county corruption came out of dry cases and rusted lockers, like bones from shallow earth. The wounded surveyors lived. The deputy lived. The volunteer tracker lived. Mara lived. And when a medic later tried to separate the child from the German Shepherd on the extraction platform, she clung to his harness so fiercely that the soldier simply said, "He stays," in a tone that ended the argument before it started. The sun was climbing weakly over the jungle by the time the helicopters lifted them clear of the sector. From above, the forest no longer looked like one haunted endless mouth waiting to swallow names and evidence whole. It looked like what it had always truly been, a vast living place used by bad men who believed secrecy made them stronger than truth. The soldier sat on the helicopter deck opposite Mara, who was wrapped in thermal blankets now, with the dog's head resting heavy across her knees. She would not take her eyes off him for long. Not because she feared he would leave. Because she was making sure the man and the dog who found her were still there each time she looked. He understood that. Too well. When they landed hours later at the forward medical field, the deputy was taken one way, the surveyors another, and federal investigators swarmed the evidence cases with the kind of controlled hunger that meant entire careers and criminal networks were about to burn. The soldier barely noticed. He was tired beyond thought, side wound bandaged, hands cut, clothes ruined, and still somehow more alive than he had felt in years. Mara reached for his sleeve before they wheeled her away, and asked the one question children always asked when the worst was over and the world still didn't fully feel solid. "You came back for me, right?" The answer should have been obvious. But obvious things mattered most when spoken aloud. He looked at her, then at the German shepherd, who stood beside the stretcher refusing to move until the child did. Then back at her frightened, exhausted, mud-marked face. "Yeah," he said quietly. "We did." Weeks later, when the first official statements had settled, the county leak had been exposed, the hidden jungle network had been broken apart, and the old mission files had started reopening under federal review, he stood outside a rehabilitation garden at a recovery center where Mara was learning to walk normally again after the injuries to her feet and ankle. The German shepherd moved beside her at the perfect protective pace dogs never needed to be taught once love had chosen its purpose. She stopped halfway down the garden path, turned, and smiled at him with something fragile but real. The soldier stood there in clean clothes for the first time in what felt like another lifetime. Scars still where they had always been, past still heavy in places it might never stop being heavy, but changed. Not healed in the cheap way people like to say after survival. Just changed. The jungle had not taken less from him, because this story ended better. The dead from years ago were still dead. The sealed lies still existed. His old guilt had not evaporated in one dramatic sunrise. But something had been returned to him in that flooded underworld beneath the jungle, something more useful than peace. A reason to keep moving. Mara held out the dog's leash. "Walk with us," she said. The German shepherd looked from her to him with those steady amber-brown eyes that had read invisible tracks in mud, tracked fear through tunnels, and refused to let either of them be claimed by men who mistook loyalty for weakness. The soldier took the leash, and as the three of them walked down the garden path together, child, veteran, dog, he understood the real ending at last. A German shepherd found footprints no human could see. And because of that, he did not just lead his soldier into the most dangerous rescue of his life. He led him back out of the darkness too.